The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It fell in grey sheets across the moors of Ashford Park, drowning the rose gardens that had once been the pride of 3 counties, filling the ornamental pond until it spilled over its stone lip and crept toward the kitchen door like something ashamed of itself. The ancient oaks along the gravel drive stood black and stripped, their great branches clawing at a sky the color of old pewter. No carriage had come up that drive in 14 months. No invitation had gone out. No music had sounded in any room. The great house itself seemed to be waiting. Or perhaps it had given up waiting entirely and had simply begun the slow, dignified process of forgetting it had ever been alive. Inside, candles burned low in rooms half covered in Holland cloth, and the servants moved through the corridors with the careful, muffled feet of people who had learned not to make sound. Not because they had been told, simply because the master did not like it. He did not like warmth. He did not like music, or the smell of flowers, or the particular amber quality of late afternoon light, or anything at all that reminded him of the year before last, when the house had been full of all of those things, and he had not understood that fullness was something that could be taken away in a single season. His Grace, Edmund Ashford, the 6th Duke of Ravenswood, sat in his study at 10:30 in the morning, with a glass of brandy he had not touched, and a letter he had read so many times the fold lines had gone soft as cloth. Outside the tall leaded windows the rain struck the glass, without mercy, in steady, indifferent rhythm. He did not hear it. He was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that no longer existed on any map, in a summer that had already ended, beside a bed where a woman who had been his entire world had, finally, quietly, closed her eyes. He had been 29 when he married Eleanor, 31 when he buried her. The child had gone first, 3 days after birth. A boy with dark hair and perfect small fingers that had never once curled around his father's thumb. The physicians had said the child was too early, too small, that these things happened. Edmund had nodded and understood none of it. He had stood in the corridor outside the nursery and felt the floor tilt under him in a way that had nothing to do with the physical world. Eleanor had followed the boy into the quiet 6 weeks later, too exhausted and too bereft to locate a reason to remain. Edmund had stood beside her bed and looked at her face, finally still after weeks of restless grief, and understood with the calm, terrible clarity of a man in shock that the rest of his life would be something he simply endured, one grey morning at a time, until it was over. That had been 14 months ago. He had been enduring it, methodically, dutifully, without complaint, and without any particular hope of improvement. The letter in his hand was from his solicitor, Miss Gareth Pell, who wrote with the persistent, polite urgency of a man who understood that his client was grieving, but also understood that grief, however genuine, did not dissolve an entail. The estate required an heir. Society required his presence. And there was, Mr. Pell noted, with the delicate insistence of someone who had been building toward this suggestion for several letters, the matter of the Holt family of Dunmore House, whose patriarch, Sir William Holt, had approached the solicitor's office with a proposal of marriage. The eldest daughter, Miss Victoria Holt, was considered the great beauty of the county, sought after by several respectable men. Mr. Pell noted, almost as an afterthought, that there was a younger daughter as well, plain and quiet and of little social consequence, who managed the household accounts because her mother had a head for neither numbers nor economy. Edmund set the letter down. He picked up his brandy. He put it down again, without drinking. He read the sentence about the younger daughter again. Plain and quiet, of little social consequence. He did not know why that clause caught at him the way it did. He was not, at this particular moment, a man capable of much feeling at all. But there was something in those flat, dismissive words that made him want to see for himself what they actually meant. Mr. Pell's categories were reliable for certain kinds of information. They were less reliable for people. He folded the letter into the drawer. Then, because he had always made his most important decisions by direct observation rather than second-hand report. He called for his horse and rode out into the rain without his coat, without a card, and without any plan beyond seeing. He arrived at Dunmore House 2 hours later, mud spattered and drenched, with a story about a thrown horseshoe on the Ashford Road and the expression of a man accustomed to being taken at his word. The housekeeper who answered the back door, a broad, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Graves, was still mid-assessment when a voice came from somewhere inside, unhurried, entirely unsentimental, as if the matter were simply obvious. "Mrs. Graves, show him in. There is tea, and cook has bread just out of the oven. A man should not stand in the rain if there is bread." He stepped through the door. She was standing at a long deal table in the center of the kitchen, a large open ledger before her, and an ink-stained finger pressed to a column of figures. She was perhaps 22, slight and dark-haired and pale, with the kind of face that required attention before it revealed what it contained. What it contained, Edmund saw in the first few seconds, was intelligence of a specific and uncommon variety. Not the performed cleverness of a girl who has been told she is clever, but the quiet, settled intelligence of someone who has spent a long time looking at the world as it actually is, and has made a thorough peace with the truth of it. She finished her column, made a small notation in the margin, and looked up at him. Her eyes, amber brown, warm and direct, held neither fear nor flattery. "Simply assessment. Please sit," she said. "You are completely drenched." "I am. Were you thrown, or did the shoe give way on the road?" "The shoe. On the Ashford Road, about 4 miles from here." Something shifted in her expression, so slight only a man paying close attention would have caught it. "Ashford Park," she said, not quite a question. "The farrier in the village can see to it in the morning. The room above our stables is dry and has a working fireplace. I would not want to impose." "You already have," she said, without unkindness. "The kettle is on." She set 2 cups on the table with the efficiency of someone who had been managing this kitchen since she was old enough to reach the shelves. "Sit down, please." He sat. He was not accustomed to sitting in other people's kitchens. He was the Duke of Ravenswood, with a dining room that seated 40, and a study in which 3 generations of Ashford men had made consequential decisions about property and the fate of tenant farmers across 4 counties. He was not accustomed to being managed by young women in grey wool dresses with ink on their fingers. He found, to his own quiet astonishment, that he did not mind it in the slightest. Her name was Cecelia. He learned this from Mrs. Graves, who called her Miss C in a tone of such easy, fond familiarity that it told him something about the real hierarchy of this household. Over an hour and a half at the kitchen table, he learned considerably more. He learned that the ledger she worked in was the estate's quarterly accounts, restructured 2 years previously around a debt her father had accumulated at cards and had not seen fit to mention to her mother. He learned of a renegotiation of supplier agreements, a reduction of staff achieved through natural attrition rather than dismissal, careful management of dairy income that had kept the estate solvent through 2 difficult harvests. He learned all of this not because she told him directly, but because she spoke of it to Mrs. Graves with the complete, unsentimental calm of someone who had long since decided that certain things simply needed doing, regardless of how one felt about doing them. She did not frame it as sacrifice. She did not frame it as achievement. It was simply what was required. At 8 o'clock, the front door opened with a carriage's arrival, and a woman's bright, carrying voice cut through the sound of the rain. "Cecelia, Victoria has been asked to open the first set at the Elmsworth Assembly. Come and hear." Mrs. Holt arrived in the kitchen like a woman who had forgotten kitchens existed. Behind her came Miss Victoria Holt, tall, bright-eyed, conscious of her own appearance with the particular confidence of a girl told since birth that her face was her most important feature. Neither glanced at Edmund, seated quietly at the far end of the table. "Mama," said Cecelia, without looking up, "we have a guest. His horse lost a shoe on the Ashford Road. He will stay above the stables tonight." Mrs. Holt registered his existence with mild, distant surprise. "Oh yes, very good." And then, immediately, to Cecelia, "But you must come and hear about the assembly. Victoria is to open the first set with young Mr. Alderton, who has 4,000 a year. That is wonderful for Victoria," said Cecelia. "I only need another moment to finish this column." Victoria's gaze moved to Edmund, with the bright, automatic assessment of a girl taught that every new man is a possibility worth evaluating. She offered him the smile she offered all possibilities. Warm, practiced, the precise temperature of encouraging without committing. "Good evening. You must forgive the chaos. We are quite hopelessly disorganized at Dunmore. Mama and I simply could not manage without Celia to keep track of everything." She said it lightly, affectionately, as though being the person who kept track of everything, so others need not, was a charming eccentricity, rather than a life sentence. "She is terribly clever with her numbers." Cecelia gave no indication of having heard. She closed the ledger with the quiet precision of someone closing a book they intend to reopen at exactly this page, rose, smoothed her skirt, and followed her mother from the kitchen. Edmund sat a long moment after they had gone, looking at the place where she had been sitting. He thought of Mr. Pell's sentence, plain and quiet, of little social consequence. He thought about what consequence actually meant, and to whom, and by what standard it was measured. In the morning he rode back to Ashford Park, changed his clothes, sat at his desk, and wrote to Mr. Pell before the ink had time to dry. He did not want to be introduced to Miss Victoria Holt. He wished to be introduced to the younger daughter. He sent the letter before he could examine the impulse too carefully, then sat back and noticed, for the first time in 14 months, that the rain had finally stopped. A pale light touched the wet roses in the garden and turned each drop of water into something, briefly, quietly luminous. He did not smile, but something moved at the very corner of his mouth. Something unfamiliar and small and almost alive. The solicitor's letter arrived at Dunmore House on a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Holt read it standing in the entrance hall, twice, then sat down on the hall chair and called for Victoria, with the voice of a woman needing a witness to something she could not process alone. Victoria read it over her mother's shoulder. Her expression did not change, not once, not by a single muscle. She handed the letter back with a careful, pleasant smile, and said it was very unexpected, and that she was sure Celia would do her best. The smile remained in place until she reached her own bedroom and closed the door. What happened inside that room, no one saw. But when Victoria emerged an hour later, she was entirely composed. And she went directly to the small writing desk in the corner of the morning room, opened the bottom drawer, and drew out a single sheet of Cecilia's correspondence paper, taken months before from her sister's writing case, for reasons she had not, until this moment, been able to articulate, even to herself. She sat with it a long while, turning it over in her fingers, before she put it away again. Not yet. But she did not burn it, either. She was a girl who had learned, over 23 years of being told her face was a fortune, that fortunes required management, and that the wise woman kept her instruments close at hand until she understood which one the situation called for. Cecelia was in the garden deadheading the last autumn roses when Mrs. Graves came to find her. "The Duke of Ravenswood has written to your father," she said, without preamble. "A formal introduction is requested. For you, Miss C. Not Miss Victoria, for you." Cecelia straightened slowly, looked down at the dark pink rose she had just cut, still holding its shape against the cold, and said, with the practical steadiness that was simply how she was made, "There must be an error in the communication." "There is not," said Mrs. Graves, with a satisfaction she did not bother to conceal. The formal call took place the following Friday. Edmund arrived with Mr. Pell and the manner of a man who had made a decision, and saw no reason to obscure it. He sat in the Holt drawing-room and directed the whole of his considerable and unhurried attention at Cecelia, in her second-best dress, with a steadiness that made the solicitor shift in his chair. Victoria sat in the window seat, hands folded perfectly in her lap. her expression the one she had spent 23 years perfecting. Only Cecelia could see the fine, furious tension in the set of her shoulders. Victoria had believed since the age of 15 that the best of everything belonged to her by right of her beauty, and she had not yet been proved wrong. Until this afternoon. The engagement was announced before the week was out. It was 2 nights before the wedding that Victoria came to Cecilia's room. She did not knock. She simply opened the door and stood in the frame with a candle in one hand, her face composed into something that might, in poor light, have passed for warmth. "I only wanted to wish you happiness," Victoria said. "Thank you," said Cecelia, setting down her brush. Victoria came further into the room, and her eyes moved, slowly and with great deliberateness, around its modest furnishings, the narrow bed, the single window, the writing case on the desk that she herself had once borrowed paper from. "You have always been so careful," she said. "So sensible. It is rather extraordinary, isn't it, how a sensible woman can find herself in possession of everything, while a woman who did everything correctly, who was pretty and charming, and did precisely what was expected of her, finds herself with nothing at all." Her voice remained light. It was the lightness that made it dangerous. "I do hope you know how to be careful with what you've been given, Celia. Dukes are not accustomed to disappointment, and grief makes men strange in ways that are not always visible at first." She smiled, and the candlelight caught the pearl comb in her hair. "I should hate for anything to spoil it for you." Cecelia looked at her sister for a long moment, at the smile that did not reach her eyes, at the careful, encoded threat dressed as sisterly concern, and understood, with the clear, unhurried comprehension that was her particular gift, that Victoria had not come to wish her happiness at all. "Good night, Victoria," she said. Victoria's smile did not waver. She left the candle burning a moment longer than necessary in the doorway, as though she wished Cecelia to remember exactly how she had looked standing there. Then she was gone. Cecelia sat a long while before she blew out her own candle. She said nothing of the visit to anyone. It was, she told herself, only her sister's disappointment finding its ordinary shape. She did not yet understand that she had just been given a warning, plainly delivered, by a woman who did not make idle ones. They were married in November in the parish church, with 6 witnesses, and cold air coming under the door, and no flowers except the single late-blooming rose from the Dunmore garden that Cecelia wore pinned at her throat. Edmund looked at that rose throughout the ceremony, at the dark pink petals still holding their shape despite the season, at the way it sat with the simple rightness of something placed exactly where it belonged. He said nothing about it, but he looked at it the way a man looks at the thing he most wants to say and has not yet found the words for. Ashford Park in winter was precisely what a house looks like when grief has been its primary resident for over a year. The rooms were cold. The curtains were drawn. Mrs. Pennington, the stout, formidable housekeeper, who had served the house for 30 years and outlasted 2 previous mistresses with her opinions entirely intact, assessed Cecelia on the first morning with an expression neither welcoming nor hostile, but simply and completely reserved. She was a woman who had learned not to form attachments until she had seen what a person did under pressure. What the new Duchess did, on her first morning as mistress of Ashford Park, was ask for the household accounts. She read them in the estate study, not the mistress's sitting room still under holland cloth, not the formal drawing room, with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who had been reading household accounts since she was old enough to understand what they meant. By that evening, Mrs. Pennington had told the cook, the footman, the 2 housemaids, and the under-butler that they might as well start doing the things left undone for 14 months, because the mistress was in the study, and the mistress appeared to be the sort of person who noticed things. Within a fortnight she had seen to the broken heating flue in the East Conservatory, arranged for the roofs on 3 neglected tenant cottages, renegotiated 2 years of stagnant supplier agreements, and set the kitchen garden right for winter with the help of Thomas, the 12-year-old under-gardener, who had been the only garden staff not laid off during the estate's period of neglect, and who turned out to be an extraordinarily capable boy who simply needed someone to tell him what needed doing and trust him to do it. She learned every servant's name by the third morning and used each one correctly from that point forward. On the first Wednesday of her marriage, she quietly removed the holland cloth from the dining chairs and ordered the chandelier lit, and Edmund sat at the opposite end of a warm, bright table for the first time in 14 months and felt something shift very slightly in his chest. It was in going through the deeper estate ledgers, the ones beneath the quarterly accounts, the ones no one had opened since before Eleanor's death, that Cecelia found the thing that would nearly cost her everything. A mortgage. Not a large one, but not a small one either, taken against the northern parcel of the estate 2 years previously, in Edmund's hand, dated 4 months before Eleanor's death, and never repaid. The interest had been accruing, quietly, invisibly, while grief occupied every room of the house, and no one had thought to look at what the house itself still owed. Attached to the mortgage document, tucked behind it, was a second paper, a formal notice from the lender, a Mr. Josiah Renfrew of London, indicating that the loan would come due for full repayment within the year, and that in the event of default, the northern parcel, which included the tenant cottages, the dairy, and the cottage where Thomas's family lived, would revert to the lender absolutely. She sat with the papers a long time before she brought them to Edmund. He did not remember signing it. That was the first terrible thing he told her, sitting across the estate study desk with the document between them, and his face gone the color of old ash. "I do not remember this," he said. "I do not, Cecelia. I do not remember the months after the child. I do not remember most of that year at all." His hand, when he reached for the paper, was not entirely steady. "I would have signed anything Pell put in front of me. I would have signed away the house itself and not known it. Then we will manage it," she said, with the same practical steadiness she brought to everything, though her own heart was moving very fast beneath her composure. "A year is not nothing. We will manage it." But when she wrote, quietly and without his knowledge, because she had learned, running her father's accounts, that men in difficulty often needed the difficulty solved before they needed to be told how frightened it made them, to Mr. Renfrew's office in London requesting terms, the answer that came back was not encouraging. Mr. Renfrew, it transpired, had recently sold the debt. The new holder of the note was a solicitor's office in Bath, the same city, though Cecelia did not yet know it. That would appear months later at the bottom of a forged letter bearing her name. It was in the 3rd week of their marriage, while the matter of the mortgage sat between them unresolved, that a second discovery very nearly broke what had only just begun. She had been reorganizing the estate filing system when she found, tucked between 2 quarterly accounts books at the back of the lower shelf, a packet of letters tied with brown ribbon. She untied it. She read the first 2 lines of the first letter, and then sat very still at the desk for a long moment. They were love letters, written in a woman's hand she did not recognize, addressed to Edmund, dated the year before his first marriage, the letters of a woman who had been very deeply involved with him, and had ended the involvement when he became engaged, returning the correspondence as a kind of formal severance, dignified, in their way, but evidence of a history she had not known existed, encountered at the worst possible moment. With the mortgage documents still open on the desk beside them, and her own composure already stretched thin, she tucked them back precisely as she had found them, and said nothing. But Edmund came to the study that evening, and found her sitting with her hands folded, and her face arranged into the expression she wore when she was managing something very carefully. And he stopped in the doorway, and said, more sharply than he intended, "What has happened?" "Nothing, Cecelia." The way he said her name, with that particular quiet weight, as though it were the word he meant rather than a word he was using, undid something in her composure she had believed well secured. She told him, in 3 sentences, exactly what she had found. The silence that followed was very long. Then Edmund walked to the shelf, found the packet, and threw it directly into the fire. "They are from a woman I knew before Eleanor," he said, watching the brown ribbon curl and blacken. She returned them because she understood the correspondence had reached its end. I kept them because I did not know what to do with them, and then forgot they existed. He paused. I am not accustomed to explaining myself. I have not, since Eleanor, spoken about any of it to anyone. He looked at the fire. I am trying to learn how. And I am aware, he added, more quietly, that I have given you two very large and very frightening things to absorb in the same fortnight. A mortgage I do not remember signing, and a woman I loved before I loved you. You have every right to be angry with me for both. I am not angry, she said, and found to her own surprise that it was true. I am tired. There is a difference. He came and sat across from her. Then let me tell you the rest of it. So there is nothing left in the dark between us. And slowly, with the careful difficulty of a man dismantling a structure he had spent 14 months reinforcing, he told her. About the child first, then Eleanor, then the 6 weeks between, then the particular quality of the silence that had filled the house after, different from ordinary silence, in the way an empty room differs from a room that has been emptied. The difference being intention and loss. He spoke for perhaps 40 minutes. She did not interrupt, did not offer consolation, which she understood he did not want, and which would have felt, to a man like him, like being handled. She simply listened, and when he had finished, she said, "Thank you for telling me. I know it was not easy," she said. "No, it will be easier the next time." "You are very certain of that," he said, with the closest approach to dry humor she had heard from him. "I am certain of most things I say. I find it saves time. Then, more quietly, we will manage the mortgage. I have already written to London." He looked at her, this woman who had absorbed a debt that threatened his house and a rival from his past in the same evening, and had answered both with the same composed, immovable steadiness, and felt, for the first time in 14 months, the precise and specific sensation of not being alone. They sat together until the candles had burned to nothing. Neither spoke much after that. Some things are established not through declaration, but through simple, mutual presence, through two people choosing to remain in the same room when the conversation has ended. Because remaining is its own statement, and sometimes the most important one. London arrived in April with cold spring rain and the social machinery of the season already fully engaged. Edmund had not appeared in society since Eleanor's death, and his absence had generated, as absences of great men always do, a considerable quantity of speculation, hardened into something resembling established opinion. He was broken. He was reclusive. Which was why the engagement to the younger Holt girl, the plain one, the accountant, had struck the ton as either very sad or very suspicious, depending on one's disposition. The Dowager Countess of Ashmore found Cecelia within the first week, 81 years old, silver-haired, cane-wielding, constitutionally incapable of pretending she had come for the tea. "You are not what I expected," the Dowager said, having settled herself and examined Cecelia thoroughly. "What did you expect? I am honestly uncertain. Not this." A pause. "You remind me of a woman I knew 30 years ago. Very quiet, very sensible, completely unable to be overlooked no matter how diligently she tried. It is a most inconvenient quality." Her sharp eyes moved around the drawing room. She made a very good marriage, in the end, happier than anyone expected, including herself. Cecelia smiled. The most genuine smile she had managed since arriving in London. "I am telling you this," the Dowager continued, setting down her cup with decisive finality, "because you are going to need a friend in this city, and I have decided I am willing to be that friend. But I need you to understand something first." Her gaze had not lost its keenness in 8 decades. "Your sister arrived 4 days ago. She has already made 11 calls, and she has been seen twice in the company of a Mr. Aldous Gray, a Bath solicitor's clerk of very modest fortune and considerably immodest ambition, who has been asking questions about your husband's finances at 3 separate card tables. I do not yet know what she is building, but she is building something. and I have never known your sister to build anything for pleasure alone." She rose, retrieving her cane. "Forewarned women make better opponents than surprised ones. I will call again Wednesday." She did, and every Wednesday after, bringing Cecelia into the few genuinely important drawing rooms in London, and giving her advice with the particular directness of someone who respects the recipient enough not to soften it. The Dowager's warning proved exact. What Victoria was building revealed itself 2 weeks later, not in a drawing room, but in the small, cold hour before a rout at Lady Fenwick's, when a note was delivered to Cecilia's dressing room requesting she come down to the garden alone before the carriages arrived. It was signed only with a single initial. Cecelia went. Victoria was waiting beneath the dripping wisteria, dressed for the evening, entirely composed, holding a folded paper in one gloved hand, as though it weighed nothing at all. "I will be brief, since we are both expected inside," Victoria said. "Mr. Renfrew's note, the one against Ashford's northern parcel, was sold some months ago to a Bath office. You knew that. What you do not know is that the office now belongs, in practice if not yet in name, to a Mr. Gray, who is a very useful sort of man, and who has agreed, as a personal favor to me, to call the note due in full within the fortnight, rather than the year your husband believes he has." She let that settle. The tenant cottages, the dairy, the boy's family, Thomas. Is it? All of it reverts the moment the note is called. And there is no fortune in London that could be raised that quickly, without selling half the estate at a loss. No duke could survive with his reputation intact. Cecelia said nothing. The rain had begun again, fine and cold, catching in the wisteria overhead. "I also have this," Victoria continued, and opened the folded paper just enough for Cecelia to see, in the dim garden light. Her own handwriting, close enough to be alarming even to her, describing inquiries made of a Bath solicitor regarding a grieving duke's vulnerabilities. "It is very good. I have had a long time to practice." She refolded it. "Here is what I am offering you, sister, because unlike you I have never pretended to be sentimental about what people are worth. You will write to your husband within the week. You will tell him the marriage was a mistake made too quickly, in grief, and that you are removing yourself from it before it does either of you further harm. You will go quietly to our aunt in Devon and say nothing further to anyone. If you do this, the note stays where it is, on its proper year's schedule, and this letter," she held it up once more, "burns unread. If you do not, both happen within a fortnight, and it will not only be your reputation in the fire, it will be his tenants, his house, everything you have spent 6 months so proudly repairing." Her voice remained, throughout, perfectly light. "I should think, being so sensible, you would find the arithmetic quite simple." She left Cecelia standing alone, under the dripping wisteria, in the cold, with the rain beginning in earnest, and for a long moment Cecelia did not move at all, because for the first time in her adult life, the numbers she was so accustomed to trusting offered her no comfort whatsoever. She did not sleep that night. She sat by the cold grate in her dressing room with a sheet of paper before her, and by the grey hour before dawn she had written and torn up 11 attempts at a letter that would explain, in words gentle enough not to break him, why she had to leave. She thought of the tenant cottages. She thought of Thomas, 12 years old, kneeling in the dirt with his careful, muddy hands, explaining to anyone who would listen why a neglected thing was not the same as a lost thing. She thought of his family, who lived in one of the cottages the note would take. She thought of Edmund's face if she told him the truth, and he chose, out of love or out of pride, to fight Victoria publicly, and lost the land, lost the tenants, lost the reputation he had spent his whole life inheriting, and had only just begun, again, to want. She was a woman who had spent her entire life solving problems quietly, without asking anyone to bear the cost of watching her do it. She did not know, even now, faced with the largest problem she had ever encountered, how to do anything else. By morning she had packed a single trunk. She had written at last a letter that satisfied her least of all the 12, brief, composed, giving no reason beyond a vague and dignified reference to a decision made too quickly in grief, and she had sealed it and left it on the desk in the estate study, propped against the ledger where she knew he would find it, because she could not manage to hand it to him directly and watch his face while he read it. She was in the front hall in her traveling cloak, the trunk already carried down by a footman who had not been told why, when Edmund came down the stairs faster than she had ever seen him move. He had found the letter earlier than she had planned, because he had gone to the study before breakfast to look over the mortgage correspondence, the very thing that had begun all of this, and had found her farewell propped against it instead. Cecelia. His voice was not sharp. It was worse than sharp. It was quiet, and it was frightened, and she had never once, in 6 months, heard fear in it before. "What is this?" "I have to go to Devon," she said. "My aunt is unwell. It is only 4. "Do not," he said, and something in the single word stopped her completely. "Do not do this. Do not stand in my hall and tell me something that is not true. I have watched you long enough to know the difference between the truth and the thing you say instead of it. And this," he held up the letter, his hand not quite steady, "this is not the truth." She looked at him. She looked at the footman, discreetly withdrawing. She looked at the trunk already loaded, at the rain starting again against the tall windows, at the whole architecture of the sacrifice she had built through a sleepless night, and she felt it, for the first time since Victoria had stood beneath the wisteria and offered her an arithmetic she could not refuse, begin, very quietly, to come apart. "If I tell you," she said, "you will do something reckless. You will fight her publicly and you will lose the northern parcel and everyone on it, because pride will not let you do otherwise, and I would rather leave quietly and let you keep your house than stay and watch you lose it defending me." "Tell me anyway," he said. "I am not asking you to spare me the difficulty. I am asking you to stop deciding, alone, what I am and am not capable of surviving. You have done this before. The letters, the household. 14 years of your family's debts carried silently, so no one had to watch you carry them. I married a woman who does not know how to ask for help. I did not marry her so that I could watch her leave me rather than learn." The rain fell harder against the glass. She stood very still in her traveling cloak, with her trunk already loaded, and her farewell letter crumpled now in his fist. And she understood, with the same clear, unhurried comprehension that had recognized Victoria's threat for exactly what it was, that she had one genuine choice remaining, and it was not the one she had spent the night constructing. "Victoria has bought the note against the northern parcel," she said. "She means to call it due within the fortnight, unless I leave you. She has also forged a letter in my hand, the same sort of thing, I imagine, that is already circulating, though I have not yet seen where. I was going to let her have the smaller victory to save you the larger one." Edmund was silent for a long moment. The fear in his face did not leave, but something else arrived beside it, the same controlled, concentrated fury she had glimpsed once before, over a packet of burning letters, except larger now, and colder, and entirely undivided in its direction. "Take off your cloak," he said. "Have the trunk carried back up. We are not leaving anything to Victoria, not the note, not the letter, and not each other." He looked at her with an intensity that made the hall feel suddenly very small. "You should have told me the moment it happened." "I know," she said, and for once did not defend herself. "I am learning. Then we will learn it together. This once, starting now." He held out his hand. After a moment, she took it. Edmund spent the next 3 days doing what he had not done in 14 months, acting decisively, in company. He rode to the city himself and settled the note against the northern parcel in full, in cash raised against his own London property rather than the estate, so there was nothing left for Mr. Gray or Victoria to call due. He sent Mr. Pell to Bath with instructions that left no ambiguity about what would happen to any solicitor's office assisting in the private ruin of a duke's tenantry, and he told the dowager everything, because she had asked, and because he had begun to understand that the strength his wife had spent her life mistaking for solitude was not in fact required to be carried alone. "She will still use the letter," the dowager said, when he had finished. "You have taken her larger weapon. She will use the smaller one out of spite, at the worst possible moment, because that is the sort of person she has decided to be." She studied him over her cup. "The Bentley ball is Friday. Everyone will be there. If she means to use it, that is where. Then we will be there first," Edmund said. The Bentley ball blazed with several hundred candles in a chandelier that turned the entire room gold, the air thick with perfume, and the social electricity that gathers where consequence is at stake. Every relevant person in London was present. The dowager stationed herself near the east fireplace, with the settled authority of a woman who had attended 60 years of these events, and knew the only way to observe them properly was from a fixed point. Victoria was already there when Edmund and Cecelia arrived, magnificent in white silk and pearls, at the center of a gathering that included 3 baronesses, 2 viscountesses, Lady Cheswick, and perhaps 50 others drifting into proximity, with the unconscious instinct of people sensing something important about to happen. She had spent the hour before their arrival well, and she had spent it, Cecelia would learn afterward, in the company of Miss Aldous Gray himself, brought to London and seated near the door, insurance, in case charm alone did not carry the evening. Edmund did not leave Cecilia's side. He introduced her through the room with the specific quiet particularity of a man presenting someone he considered important, not performing pride, simply, precisely, making clear that this woman beside him was the point. Victoria let this proceed for the better part of an hour. Then she began, with the timing of a genuine artist, waiting until Cecelia was perhaps 20 feet away and moving closer. "I feel I must confess something," she said, to the assembled baronesses and viscountesses and Lady Cheswick and the 50 others, in the warm, carrying voice she had spent 23 years perfecting. "And I hope you will forgive me if it is indiscreet, but I believe honesty is always the kinder thing, even when uncomfortable." A sorrowful pause, the pearls catching chandelier light. "I have recently come into possession of a letter, written, I am nearly certain, in my own sister's hand, some weeks before her engagement was announced, regarding inquiries she had made of a Bath solicitor as to the financial arrangements available to a grieving duke's widow. I did not want to believe it. I still do not entirely wish to." She drew the folded paper from her reticule with trembling theatrical care. But a sister's loyalty to the truth must, in the end, outweigh a sister's loyalty to comfortable silence. Must it not? I only feel for his grace, knowing that a man in his position, susceptible perhaps to a particular kind of management. She held the letter out, half open, toward Lady Cheswick, whose hand rose almost involuntarily to receive it. The room had gone very still. It was the stillness that precedes a verdict, the kind that sounds like agreement before a single word of judgment is spoken, the kind that fills itself with implications so completely that the accusation need never be stated outright. Cecelia felt it settle over her like cold water, felt 200 pairs of eyes measuring her against a lie she could not yet disprove in front of them, and for one long, terrible second she understood exactly what it must feel like to watch everything be taken from you in a room too bright and too crowded to hide in. Into that silence, Edmund spoke. "I would be careful, Miss Holt, about what you hand to Lady Cheswick." His voice was not raised. It did not need to be. The room was already silent around him. "That letter is a forgery, and I can prove it in less time than it will take you to explain how you came to possess it." Victoria's hand did not lower. "You cannot know that." "I can, because the solicitor named in that letter, a Mr. Aldous Gray, who I believe is standing by the east door at this very moment, having accompanied you here tonight, was, until 3 days ago, the holder of a note against my northern estate, purchased some months back with the express intention of forcing my wife to abandon this marriage under threat of ruining 40 tenant families, including a boy of 12 who has done more honest work in this past year than most men in this room manage in a decade. He let that land, watched Mr. Gray's face go the color of the marble floor beneath him. That note has been settled in full, as of Tuesday. In cash. There is nothing left to threaten anyone with, Miss Holt, except a piece of paper you spent, I am told, the better part of a year learning to forge convincingly, which is a great deal of effort for a woman who claims she only wishes her sister well. Lady Cheswick's hand had frozen entirely, the letter now suspended between two people who both, visibly, wished to be nowhere near it. I came to Dunmore House the year my wife's family thought I was thrown from my horse, Edmund continued, turning now, deliberately, from Victoria to the room at large. I found a young woman balancing an estate's accounts in a mended grey dress, feeding a stranger bread because it was the decent thing to do. I chose her before I had spoken more than a handful of words to her sister, not out of grief, not out of manipulation on anyone's part, but because she was the most genuinely, unperformatively good person I had encountered in a very long time, and because 6 months of watching her run toward every difficult thing in my life rather than away from it has taught me more about what a marriage should be than the whole of society could teach me in a lifetime of these rooms. His grey eyes found Cecilia's, and everything guarded in them fell away at once. In front of 200 witnesses, because he had decided that witness was, this time, precisely the point. I chose you, he said to her, directly, his voice dropping to something the nearest guests would hear and were meant to hear. I chose you because you told a stranger there was bread. Because you tried, 3 nights ago, to leave everything you have, including me, rather than let me lose a parcel of land defending you, and I have never in my life witnessed a more infuriating or more extraordinary act of love. I am not going to let you carry anything alone again, starting tonight, in front of every person in London who needs to see it. She said nothing for a long moment. She simply looked at him, this man who had been a stranger 7 months ago, who had sat in her kitchen and listened to her balance accounts, who had thrown a packet of old letters into the fire rather than let a shadow sit between them, who had run down a staircase faster than she had ever seen him move, because he could not bear the thought of her leaving quietly. She was the same Cecelia she had always been, the woman who managed things without asking for acknowledgement, who had spent her whole life being useful rather than valued. Except that she was standing in the middle of the Bentley ball, with 200 people watching, and the most important man in the room had just told all of them, in front of the sister who had spent a year trying to destroy her, exactly what she was worth. And she let herself receive it, without managing it, without deflecting it, without finding a practical way to make it smaller so it would be easier to hold. She reached up and took his face in both her hands. You watched me, she said, very quietly, in a voice that shook only slightly. I have not stopped, he said. I do not intend to. She kissed him, in the middle of the Bentley ball, in front of 3 baronesses and 2 viscountesses and Lady Cheswick, who would later tell 4 people she had always had doubts about the letter's authenticity, and 50 others, and the Dowager Countess of Ashmore, who said afterward it was the most sensible thing she had witnessed in 60 years of attending these events. Victoria did not remain to watch it. She left the Bentley ball before 11, Mr. Gray having already made a swift, unaccompanied exit through the east door the moment his name was spoken aloud in a room full of men whose good opinion he required for his livelihood. She did not attend another London event that season. The forged letter was never spoken of publicly again, not because it was forgotten, but because Edmund's account of it had replaced the original so completely in the social record that it had been rendered weightless, a curiosity rather than a scandal, evidence of nothing but its author's ambition. By autumn, word reached Ashford Park that Victoria had accepted an offer from a clergyman in Wiltshire, quiet and decent and uninterested in social machinery, and that she appeared, against all expectation, to be approaching the arrangement with genuine equanimity. Cecelia wrote her a letter of congratulation that was warm and brief, and contained not a single reference to London, to the note, to the letter, or to the wisteria garden, where an ultimatum had once been offered in a light, pleasant voice. Victoria did not reply for 3 weeks. When she did, the letter was shorter than expected, and less elegant than her usual correspondence, but it was honest in a way her letters had rarely been, and Cecelia read it twice, placed it in her desk drawer, and felt something loosen that had been tight since November. 1 year after the wedding, Ashford Park in June was unrecognizable from the house that grief had kept. The rose gardens were in full bloom, the ornamental pond clear and repaired, the holland cloth gone from every room, the chandelier lit every evening. Thomas's family remained in their cottage on the northern parcel, which belonged, now and permanently, to no one but the Ashfords. The estate study had become a shared library. Her ink stains on the left side of the desk, his papers on the right, sharing the same shelves with the companionable disorganization of things that belong in the same space. On a long afternoon in late June, Cecelia sat in the sunniest corner of the rose garden. In the chair Thomas had placed there without being asked, with a letter from the Dowager in her lap, full of London news and pointed observations, its final lines added in a slightly different ink, as though after a pause, "You were right to be patient. You were right about everything, as the steady ones always are. They always are, and no one ever tells them so until afterward. I am telling you now, stop being patient, and simply be happy. It is not a lesser thing." She heard his step on the garden path, the particular unhurried weight of it, the way it always slowed slightly when he came around the corner of the rose beds and found her there. He sat beside her without a word, rose without a word to fetch a fresh cup of tea when hers had gone cold while she read, and sat down again. "You watched me," she said again, not quite the way she had said it at the Bentley ball, but with the same meaning, layered now with everything that had happened since, in the kitchen at Dunmore, in the conservatory, every difficult thing since. "You watched me, and you did not look away, even when I tried very hard to make it easier for you to. I was learning you," he said. "It took me a long time to understand that loving you meant refusing to let you disappear quietly, even when you were certain that disappearing quietly was the kinder thing to do. And now," he looked at her in the summer garden, the roses blooming in every direction, the Dowager's letter in her lap, and said, simply, "Now I know that you are the person I will spend the rest of my life refusing to let carry anything alone." She leaned her head against his shoulder. In the conservatory, visible through the open glass door of the house, the lemon tree stood in the best patch of afternoon light, its branches full and dark green, one small yellow fruit rounding slowly into shape, not yet ripe, not yet finished, but alive and certain, growing the way everything worth growing does, one careful inch at a time, and never, in the end alone, on the desk in the estate study. Tucked inside the very ledger that had once held a mortgage document neither of them would forget, a dark pink rose lay pressed flat between 2 pages of numbers, the same rose worn at her throat on her wedding day, the same numbers that told how a woman had once held her family's house together in silence, and had, at Ashford Park, finally learned not to. It had been there since January. She had not moved it. There was something right about it remaining exactly where it was, a small, beautiful thing living inside the record of all the quiet work, waiting to be found by someone who knew how to look. He had known how to look. That, she thought, leaning into the warmth of his shoulder in the June afternoon, was the whole of it, really. In a world that had spent her life looking past her, he had come to her kitchen door in the rain and looked, simply, completely looked. And when the world later tried, with real cunning and real cruelty, to take what he had seen away from her, he had not stood by and let it happen, and neither, in the end, had she. They had chosen each other in the easy moments and the frightening ones. in kitchens and conservatories and ballrooms lit gold with candlelight, and that, she understood now, was the only definition of love that had ever meant anything. Not the absence of danger to it, but the refusal, again and again, to let it go. The afternoon bloomed around them, warm and unhurried, and entirely, irreversibly alive. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.